If you could sit erect in your chair, have your back against the back of the seat, your feet flat on the floor, and relax your shoulders, please. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadats, 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 namadats. Okay, if everybody could please join me in chanting the Jusei Ge, which we have in the PDF or on page 54 of the Hawaiian Service Book. Gagon Josegan Ishimujodo Shiga Fumanzok Sefu Joshogak Gao Muryoko Fui Dai Seishu Fusai Shobingu Seifu Joshogak Gashi Jobutsudo Myosho Chojipo Kukyo Mishomon Seifu Joshogak Ryoku Jinshonen Joe Shubongyo Shigumu Jodo Isho Tenninshi Jinniki Endai Ko Fusho Musaido Shoujo Sankumyo Kosai Shuyakunan Kaihi Chiegen Meshi Konmoan Heisoku Shoakudo Tsudatsu Zen Shumon 1月主樹期天候音符源一種解放像公正功徳法上大主従説法四式不要一切物具足習徳本元年秩序満得意三害を如仏無下知通達未不詳願学営力投資最小損志願若果大聖の感動国書天人東地妙慶ナマダムナマダムナマダムナマダムナマダムナマダム元に宿徳平等正祭同壺大神往生Namadats, namadats, 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 namadats. Well, good evening, everyone. So nice to see everybody so close to the beginning of the new year. And not surprisingly, tonight, the Dharma talk is going to be on the Buddhist perspective of the new year. And specifically, we're going to be talking about the Japanese Jodo Shinshu perspective on what the new year is, because as we know in our discussion groups and our Dharma talks, that Buddhism has many different schools and different interpretations of what the new year means. Before I talk about that, it's kind of ironic. I have a personal reflection. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. I actually grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland. For those that are in the Ekoji area, they know where that is. And so I grew up with watching the New Year's Eve service live in the 1960s and the 1970s. And so it was very exciting for the ball to come rushing down and to see whatever Dick Clark, and people remember who Dick Clark is, who he's got the current star from, you know, Frankie Valli to the Disco Bee Gees or whoever he always had over the years. And then I moved to Seattle in the late 70s, and lo and behold, they did not have anything live. They would show a 3-hour delayed thing of New York City. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is really boring. So we'd be sitting there and we'd be watching this delayed video for 3 hours. And of course, technology has changed. And now, of course, they have live coverage of things that happen on the West Coast. And especially for those that live in Seattle and myself, it was very special because they decided to use the Space Needle. For those that might not be quite familiar with it, that was the landmark from the 1962 World's Fair that is so iconic. It's the ultimate mid-century symbol. So it's basically like a Lost in Space or a Jetsons flying saucer on top of these long legs that go down. And so they were very creative. So what they would do for New Year's Eve is what they would do is they turn off the lights on all the supporting pillars. So you would have the UFO above you and the fireworks would go off and the lights would go around. And so it was quite thrilling. So I did get to be able to experience having something live in Seattle. Now, it's ironic with how our lives go because I'm thinking my whole life when I was younger, when I was in college, it's like, I would love to go to New York Times and be there for New Year's Eve. Well, guess where I live right now? And so all the members of the New York Buddhist Church are like, are you going to go to Times Square? I'm like, no way. I can't imagine anything more intimidating or scary at this stage of my life than to forget about COVID. I mean, just the idea of doing that. And the subway, the line that goes from Central Station here is on that line. So just all New York is paralyzed by what happens. And so I'm like, thank you very much. I think because we'll be having service here, of course, like all the temples that were the BCA temples will have New Year's Day, New Year's Eve services, and then New Year's Day services. So I think I'll just stay here and not worry about the chaos that goes down on, Times Square. But talking about New Year's, it's such a cultural thing for us in America to think about what we have. And we have the icons of the New Year baby waving goodbye to the old man with the white beard. And as we get older, maybe we relate to the guy with the white beard more than we do with the baby waving in the New Year. And it's ironic because when I was younger, I always was kind of melancholy. So even when I was a teenager, I thought, oh, 1975 is disappearing. Oh, I did this in 1975, and I don't know about 1976. And as I've gotten older now, I think I'm more in the idea of that we're welcoming the new year, the opportunities and what we can do in the new year. So always New Year's was very secular to me up until I started practicing Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. And as you well know, that I lived in Japan for 5 years before I came across Jodo Shinshu. Now, when I was living in Japan, I was studying Buddhism. So where I lived in Kamakura, which is about a 90-minute train ride from Tokyo, which means that guess where everybody goes for New Year's Eve from Tokyo? They go to Kamakura. So this town of about 200, 300,000 people would inundated with 4 million people from Tokyo. And so what was nice for me was because I was studying Buddhism at that point, and instead of going to the Shinto shrines where a lot of the activities were going on, for those that aren't aware, that Kamakura was the unofficial capital of Japan for many centuries by the shogunate. And so there were many temples that you could go to in the middle of New Year's, and you would be the only person there, so to speak. And so what I learned to do is I like to go to the smaller temples and enjoy the quietness. And one of the rituals that I never did, which I really wish that I had done, that in Japan, because Japan is very mountainous, has a lot of hills, and indeed, where I lived in Kamakura was on a hill. Actually, my house was a steep grade up and then 20 steps that were this tall to get up to my house. My house was carved into the hill. But in Japan, the tradition that I think a lot of us haven't heard is that on New Year's Day, what people would do is families would get up and they would go and walk up on these hills or the mountains, and they'd wait for the sunrise. And they'd have a nice picnic there. And what they were doing is that it wasn't the wild party, it wasn't the wild banging in the new year. What it was is it was welcoming the new year in a very gracious way and having a nice picnic. And I'm sure I've never experienced it, but I'm sure a lot of those poor kids that were dragged along are like, what are we doing, folks? It's 5 o'clock in the morning, we're climbing up a mountain. But the idea, I think, is very similar to the Buddhistic idea that, we are welcoming the new year and we are excited and celebrating it. But we're also trying to be very contemplative and reflective on what the past new year has been to us and what the coming new year is to us, but specifically in a Buddhist context. So, like I said, being in Japan, one of the things about New Year's that we don't have a lot in the United States is that there would be wonderful firework displays. And so it's very easy to go out and be very excited by watching the fireworks. But that's how a lot of the Japanese view the new year. But for us Americans that are following the Buddhist path, I think a lot of us have come accustomed to what we do in Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, which is that on New Year's Eve, we come in and we ring the bell, or if we're lucky enough, a bone show, which they have at the Seattle Betsuin and the Fresno Betsuin. For those that aren't familiar with it, so you've all seen the gongs that we ring in services, but they have what they call a bone show, which is probably, without exaggeration, 15 feet wide. It's like the small beetle hanging down and then what you do is you have a rope and you pull back a log. You literally pull back a log and you let go of the log and it reverberates. And so those that are fortunate enough to have that experience, I think what I'm going to be talking a little bit about here about the symbolism of the bell and it ringing through time and ringing through our attachments is a little more realistic for us because we've experienced that. But whether we're ringing the gong or whether we're ringing something smaller, the idea is that what we're trying to do is we're trying to announce to the world symbolically that we are viewing all these attachments that we have. Now, when I say these attachments, that's the more technical word in Buddhism when we talk about the things that we have. For example, greed, vanity, selfishness, anger. These are a few of what we call of attachments. And according to the Buddhist doctrine, we have 108 of them. And when I was doing research for this talk tonight, there was somebody that actually broke down the mathematical formula. And my brain doesn't work that way. So they're talking about there's 16s of these and that equals 32s of these and this equals this and this and this. But what I got out of it is that what's very special about when we ring the concho at night, as I said, we are making a proclamation that is supposed to go out not only to us, but to the symbolic or the spiritual universe. Some of you have heard me talk about before that, like when we're at service at any of the temples in the BCA, all of the gongs, all of the keens, the small bells that we have, all of those are matched to a perfect pitch. Now, for our Western ears, we might not be familiar with that, but they are done to the classical Chinese perfect pitches, which is the sound, which is the perfect pitch. And so in the Pure Land, when the birds are chirping according to the sutras, or when the creek is bubbling by, it's one of those 5 sounds, which is to put us at the ultimate state of calmness or meditation or contemplation. So when we hear the gong rung in the morning at a Sunday service at one of our temples, the ministers are supposed to be on pitch with that. I think most of us can't do that because it's technically difficult. But what we're doing is we're symbolic saying we're breaking the silence. We're sending the sound of the Dharma or the Buddhist teachings out as an aspiration for us to hear. And indeed, depending on where you go, some of the gongs are even the little one that I have here behind me, believe it or not, you probably can't hear it on the audio, but when I ring it, it's still reverberating with my first few sentences that I'm saying. And so what it's doing is that when we gather together, hopefully if you are able to, or doing it virtually, is that we ring the concho or the bell 108 times. And what we're doing is that when I was, whatever temple that I've served at, because the tradition is so different in all the temples, is what I was taught is that when you have, I don't have the gong, but the nice hammer that we use for the concho, is what I would do is I would have the members, and I've done this at Ekoji and Placer and Fresno, and in New York, we haven't done it yet, but I'll have them do it here too, is that instead of just going up and ringing the bell, which is so cute because I love watching the kids do it. One of the things that's interesting as a minister, it doesn't matter the size or the age of the person. When they come and they ring that, I've had little girls that are like 8 years old just bang, and you're like, oh my gosh. And then you've got other people that are very gentle. But no matter how hard you ring it, what you're doing is I ask the people to go up with the stick that they're going to do, and they do gasho. Because what you're doing is that symbolically you are creating this sound that reverberates. One of the things that is interesting about this is that it reverberates. Supposedly, when we do it this 108 times, it's not only in the present moment, but it also symbolizes the past tense and the present tense. So when we're ringing the concho at night, we're not just ringing it like, okay, goodbye, my greed attachment. What we're doing is we're saying, I'm sending this to the Kurt from last year, the Kurt that's standing right here, right now, and the Kurt in the future. So then when we have the stick, we do gasho because we realize what we're making the sound is more than just sound. It's a way for us to express the Dharma in a non-verbal way. And so, like I said, people take it and they hit it. And then I ask them to do the stick again and then bow. And my hope would be that the person that's doing that might reflect on the 100, well, it's not 108, but of all of the attachments that we have, that maybe they're thinking about last year I was very selfish, or last year I was very impatient. Or it doesn't have to be that concrete, but the idea is that 10-second interaction with you and the concho or the bonsho is very important. One of the things, again, looking at some of the literature for tonight's Dharma talk, is that in a lot of schools of Buddhism in Japan, you are getting rid of your 108 attachments. And this is an interesting nuance that's different with Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, with other schools. And I'm not saying which is better, I'm just saying it's different. Is what we're doing is that we're acknowledging those 108 attachments, which from my background working in social work and mental health is very healthy. So instead of saying, okay, I'm going to take this and I'm getting rid of greed, I'm getting rid of anger, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm hitting this and I acknowledge that I have greed, that I have anger. And when it's present or when it's conscious in our mind, hopefully that is something that we can work on. And as you've heard me talk about the Buddha and the idea of Buddhism is that we address the great things in life and maybe some kind of the dark sides of our life. And so at night, it's like, okay, I acknowledge that I have these attachments and that, whether you think of it at that moment, that the idea is that I'm going to acknowledge them and then I will work with them, which I like that version much better than we are getting rid of these and all I have to do is ring a gong and then I can forget about it. No, we want to reflect upon that. So basically, when we talk about New Year's Eve for the temples, there are a lot of rituals. When I was going through, there's like one, and for us, especially those of us that are Ekoji members or have participated in Ekoji does not have a lot of the Japanese cultural trappings that a lot of the temples do. And I hate to be generalistic, but I mean, to be honest, the West Coast, the temples are much more Japanese than they are at Ekoji. So when I was going to Seattle, when I was part of Fresno, you would get soba. And so what you would do, and we're going to have soba here in New York. I don't know if they know the tradition behind it, but the idea is that you take the soba and you take your chopsticks or your hashi and you pull it out and you take this long strand and you try to consume the whole long strand. If you don't, that means, that means that my livelihood or my life is going to be shorter or my attachments are going to be shorter. So there's all of these other things that we could talk about that I don't think really relate to Jodo Shinshu, because as we know, or for those that participated just a few weeks ago, we talked about superstition or the idea in Jodo Shinshu that the whole point is enlightenment or seeing things as it are, and these ideas of magical thinking just makes it prolonged and taking us further from the truth. So for us tonight, reflecting upon New Year's, and hopefully that you will be doing that at home or virtually, what I like you to do is that just to take that time with the boncho or when you're ringing the bell, that we're addressing our flaw. And that's not focusing on the negative. I have friends that say, oh, Buddhism is so pessimistic. No, it's not. We have we have differences in our lives and our perspectives. And what we do is we look bluntly at some of our imperfections. We tend to look at our nice things. Oh, I'm a nice person. I'm a friendly person, but I'm also a greedy person. And that time at New Year's Eve, hopefully that we can take a moment to do that. And then the other important part for those that are very fortunate to be able to participate in person with the Sangha, there's usually a meal and fellowship. And so that helps us bring us into the new year. So I wish you all a very happy and successful and healthy new year. I will be seeing you hopefully in the new year with the Dharma Breeze, but I want to officially welcome you to a new year. So if we could conclude with silent meditation before we do, let's do the reading first. Tonight we're going to be doing, let me get my glasses on. I'm a little vain. I'll be honest, I'm vain. So, okay, we're going to be doing the Jodo Shinshu Creed on page number 4 in the PDF. So if you could please join me in reading that. In trusting in the vow of the Buddha and reciting the sacred name, I shall proceed through the journey of life with strength and joy. Revering the light of the Buddha and reflecting upon my imperfect self, I shall strive to live a life of gratitude. Follow the teachings of the Buddha and discerning the right path, I shall spread the true Dharma. Rejoicing in the compassion of the Buddha, respecting and aiding others, I shall do my best to work towards the welfare of society. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadats. Okay, now I'll take my glasses off, and now we can do just a few moments of silent meditation. Please join me by sitting in your chair and relaxing. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadats, namadats, namadats.